Sego, I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk on this Tuesday, July 16th. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, and politics, and identity as well. We may step on a few toes along the way, but our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us, and we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk native. Well, but before we do, let me remind people that we stream audio of the show on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com, and we stream video of the show on Facebook Live. We take the audio and we post it up on SoundCloud after we broadcast, and that in turn puts it up on all of your favorite podcast platforms. We take video of the show and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. There you can find this show, our show in New York, as well as some of our short form videos that we do from time to time. I am, as I said, I am the host of Let's Talk Native, and I'm assisted by Jake Proud here in studio, who is managing our video and our sound. I've also got Ed Schindler joining us for the program. In the corner, I got hidden away here. I got my granddaughter Rayel, and we'll squeeze her into the shot as as we get going here. But again, let's get right into it now. One of the things this is gonna be a little bit of a redo, I guess, or of our last show. I want to talk about Christopher Columbus. I want to talk about the Santa Maria and the replica that was that was docked here locally, and I want to talk a little bit about the effects of all that stuff and a little bit more backstory. We've learned a little bit since the crew came and went, but let me start from the beginning. So last Saturday, I got the notice that this replica of the Santa Maria, and I guess I knew it was coming, but this replica of the Santa Maria was docked at the marina at the Erie Basin in Buffalo. And so a group of us decided we were going to go there and at least let's try to have a conversation. Let's at least use this opportunity to engage the subject matter of the ship, its captain, and the whole bit. So again, it was the Santa Maria, replica of the Santa Maria, came all the way from Spain. Had a crew with them. Now I don't know. I mean, Buffalo had this other event going on with tall ships and all these sailing vessels that were in the area, and they happened to coordinate their visit along the same lines, although it wasn't necessarily a part of that whole thing. They're doing this tour. They're collecting money for people to come onto the ship and take a look and examine it. It isn't much of a history lesson, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. But that's what we were there for. So that was this Saturday. I showed up there. I was actually the first native person that was there anyway. There were already some white people who were boarding the ship, and in fact, there was a film crew that was filming on the ship. And frankly, I thought the film crew was part of the ship. I didn't, I thought maybe they were. I didn't know what was going on, but anyway, so there were a number of people lined up to board the ship and see what was what it was all about. I guess I'll admit I never went on the ship. I wasn't that interested in boarding the vessel, but I was interested in having a conversation. Now, I will say before this thing even got to Buffalo, it had already come through Akwesasne. Actually, it was docked at Loran Thompson's marina in right on Akwesasne, right on the St. Lawrence. They were greeted and somewhat graciously. They were greeted. They told them, look, since you're here, why don't you take that Canadian flag down off of your ship and hang a Haudenosaunee flag? So they gave him a Hiawatha belt, the purple belt with the kind of emulates the Hiawatha belt. They gave him that flag, and they hoisted it up and they mounted it on the ship. Then apparently took it down immediately, but they did put it up there just for the time being. They left there. They went to they got into Lake Ontario, sailed to Rochester. They were greeted by another group of Native people from the urban center in Rochester, Ronald Garrow and Company. Now they had a bit of an exchange that involved a recommendation from the native people in Rochester that it would be great if this crew would offer an apology for the genocide that Columbus was responsible for. Now, so they were trying to elicit this apology from them. And in doing so, they decided they would actually create a plaque, give it to the crew of the Santa Maria, and ask them to put it on display. Now, this plaque literally said that they apologized. Now, obviously, these words were being put in their mouths, and the crew kind of accepted the plaque and said, "Yeah, we're not sure we can put this on display, though. It's going to be entirely up to the captain of this ship, what we really do with it." So they took the plaque and they did their photo ops, and of course, the ship went on its way. And we learned, and I'll tell you exactly how we learned, but we learned that they actually threw the plaque away. They didn't put it on display, and they just tossed it. So now the ship is here in Buffalo, or it's not now today, but it was on the weekend. So they already had some engagement from native people in Akwesasne and in Rochester. So we weren't the first native people that they encountered. So they can't claim complete ignorance or innocence about what they knew or thought they knew about how native people viewed this ship. So any expression of surprise or outrage or hurt that any of their crew felt shouldn't have been a complete surprise to them. But we showed up there, and we had a number of banners. Among those banners was a banner that said genocide, one that said rapist, one that said slavery or slaveholder. I don't know. I think murder might have been another one. I know a couple of people had signs that said something to the effect of, that Columbus was responsible for genocide. Something like celebrating Columbus is celebrating genocide, something along those lines. So I did end up having a conversation with one of the crew members. He came over and he said, these banners are pretty insulting. They're very hurtful to me personally. And so I engaged him. I says, I'm more offended that you're offended in the first place. These signs aren't for you. They're about what the ship represents. He goes, well, you have to understand. We are here to celebrate this ship. I says, yeah, I know, but you're heroizing what the ship and its crew did. And what I'm here for is to offer some truth and offer a counter narrative to what you guys are doing. While you guys are trying to celebrate this ship, I'm telling you that ship represents the first slave ship to come to the Western Hemisphere. I said, and it didn't bring slaves. It took slaves. And then, the crew member that I talked to, he says, well, actually, this one never made it back to Spain, so this one didn't. I said, well, lucky us. The other two did. The other two didn't just take slaves. They took little girls for slaves, because that was what the appetite that the Spanish men had for, for slavery coming from. And once they knew what the deal was, they said, oh, we'll take some little girls back to us. But I think it's important that people understand the atrocities that were committed by Columbus and his men. And I also want to remind people that ultimately, there were clergy that were a part of, setting up. Once Columbus had established a presence on these islands in the Caribbean, there was clergy among them so clergy wrote down everything. Columbus wrote down everything. Some of his crew kept journals. That's why we know some of this stuff. We're not just making this stuff up. We're not just speculating about murder or rape or disfigurement and torture. We're not just speculating here. They wrote of these things. I mean, on some of it was like the clergy wrote of some of this stuff because of the outrage, but some of Columbus's men, they wrote of it because of, I don't know if they were proud of their actions or whatever, but they certainly had no shame. They weren't burying it. They wrote it right down. So that's what we wanted to talk about. And I told the crew member, I'm not here protesting the ship. I'm saying, you brought that here. Now you're giving me the opportunity to have a conversation. You brought it here, so now we're going to tell you what that ship represents to us. That's what I saw. And so it's the same debate that we have when we talk about Christopher Columbus in general. Look, there's statues all over the place. I mean, there's statues in multiple places in Buffalo. There's statues in multiple places in Syracuse, Albany, New York City. And there's this ongoing debate about whether these statues should be on display. And my point is, if you don't take them down, then we're going to talk about what this man really represents. You may heroize him in bronze, but we're going to tell you some truth about it. We're going to give you the more full picture of what Columbus represents. And just so you know, just to put a finer point on it, when Columbus first arrives and sees the native people, his initial entries in his journals were about how beautiful they were. He was enamored by the beauty of these people. The women were beautiful. The men were tall and slender and in shape. I mean, he marveled at their physique. He talked about what beautiful people they were. Then he commented about how generous they were and how passive they were. But then you see in some of his entries of his journals that he starts saying things like, these people are so docile, we could rule over them with merely 50 men. Now, there was 1 million people there. There were a lot of people in these islands in general. And he said, we could enslave them with 50 men. So he immediately looked at these people as somebody that he could convert, as people he could convert into his servants. Now, the other thing he observed, and there wasn't a lot of it, but he saw a few people had jewelry. He remarked one person in particular had a gold earring, and when he was drawn to it, the person took the earring off and he said, "You can have it as a gift." So he couldn't believe their generosity. He's thinking, well, if they're willing to give this away, they must have lots of it. So what Columbus set up was I don't know what else you call it, a tax? I don't know what he made the people of these islands do. He gave them these little they call them bells almost, these little balls, metal balls on a chain. And he gave each one of them this thing. He says, you need to take this out and you need to fill it with gold and bring it back to me each day. Each day I expect you to bring this ball back filled with gold, or this bell as he called it. And if they didn't, they'd be punished. Now, whether they had warnings or not, I don't know. But what was documented was that if they didn't fill these little metal bells, they would have their hands severed off. They would literally take them to a stump and chop their hands off. Say, now, go collect and make sure you fill it up the next time. Or they would cut off an ear. Or they would cut off their nose. They disfigured them in some way. Yeah, you were beautiful before we got here, but you're not going to remain beautiful unless you do our bidding. So these people were tortured. They were enslaved under the threat of extreme violence to fulfill the lust that Columbus and his men had. Now, we talk about rape. It is documented both by Columbus and some of his men that they were paid with female slaves, young girls. They were paid with them. And in one of the handwritten accounts, one of these guys says, well, the captain, this was a gift that he gave to me, this girl. And he talked about the fight that she put up when he was trying to take her. He talked about how violent she was and what a tremendous fight she put up. And that how much he had to beat her to get her to submit. Then he boasted about how well she performed once she was beaten into submission. This is what they wrote. This is what were their own accounts. So again, we aren't speculating about these things. We know what they brought back. We know the young girls they brought back to Spain. So this Christopher Columbus that is heroized by Italian Americans all over the United States, not so much back home in Italy, but heroized here in the United States, in cities like New York and Buffalo and all across. That's why more and more cities are saying, you know what? I can't do this anymore. We're not going to celebrate Columbus Day anymore. We're going to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, while I'm not necessarily trying to mandate that there be Indigenous Peoples Day celebrated on the second Monday of every October, I am offering the counter narrative to Columbus. As long as they're going to keep celebrating this man, I'm going to offer some truth to it. So as some of these truths come out, and you realize even more, not just the torture that these people went through for things like not fulfilling their lust for gold, but they wouldn't submit to their religious beliefs. They wouldn't accept Jesus Christ and the Bible and all that other stuff. So the ones who rejected it, they killed them. They executed them. And they did it a couple of different ways. One of the ways they did it is they hung them. Sometimes they hung them and burned them at the same time. They'd hang them 13 at a time and then build a fire at their feet. So they would torture them. It wasn't just enough to kill them. They had to make sure that they tortured them. And they did it. The reason they did 13, that represented the 12 apostles in Jesus Christ. So in what twisted way did these Spanish men believe that they had to almost create a ritualistic execution of these people? They also mounted them on crosses, crucified them, and then built fires at their feet. And it gets worse. There were times that some of the native women, knowing what their children were going to face, and among the things that they faced was they also brought attack dogs. So they would have these dogs tear at the flesh of these people, and they would rip the babies out of the arms of these of the mothers, and they would feed the babies to these dogs. Yeah, you heard me right. And how do I know this? Again, it's written down, folks. They documented this. The religious figures, the bishops, that went along with them, they wrote of this stuff. They documented the atrocities. The women were so appalled by this, and they knew the fate that their children were going to have. So some of these women would drown their babies themselves, so they wouldn't be fed. Their live babies would not be fed to these dogs. They were casting their babies into the ocean. They would cast them into these lagoons. This is the level of atrocity that was committed. There were like 1.5 million Arawaks in the Caribbean. Within 50 years, the entire population was wiped out. That's the story that needs to be told. So, if this country is going to celebrate a man who never even made landfall here. Keep in mind, Columbus never made it to North America. He never made to South America or Central America. He only made it to the islands. And in fact, he died believing that he had somehow reached the Indies. He believed that he had reached Indonesia. So this guy who they want to celebrate as this tremendous navigator, this brave explorer. Well, let's unpack that a little bit. He wasn't a brave explorer. He was a greedy individual who did this voyage believing he could get rich. And nobody else believed what he believed. He believed that he could sail west across the Atlantic Ocean and reach the Indian Islands. That's what he believed. And frankly, that's why to this day, many people still call us Indians. Because of Columbus. Because he was lost. He didn't even know where he was. He miscalculated the earth almost by half. I mean, so he was closer to Indonesia and India and these spice routes and the Silk Road, all that stuff. He was closer when he was in Spain than at any other time during his journey. He sailed farther away from his destination. That's how wrong the guy was. So the reason many nations, as he approached, monarch after monarch, most of them said, "Nah, this guy's nuts. He's nuts." And because people had already been able to do some calculations on how big the Earth must have been, but no, Columbus, no, I'm sure of it. So he didn't find the gold. He didn't find the spice routes. He didn't find the riches of the East. But he found this land that had a little bit of gold, had some interesting feathers and birds. But there was a population there that could be enslaved. So that's what he did. He enslaved them. So the slave trade starts with Columbus. The genocide of the Western Hemisphere starts with Columbus. And there's no denying this. I mean, there's no debunking this version of history. Now, this isn't the history that kids are learning in school. Not the kids in elementary school, not the kids in high school, not even the kids in college. They are being taught this history. There's a book called Rethinking Columbus that kind of sets all the records straight. States like Arizona banned the book. They said, no, Well, no, we don't. We're not gonna have this book here. So, if you're gonna sail a replica of one of Columbus's ships, and this isn't the first one. This has been done before. I don't know, a decade ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I think they had a replica of the Nina that they sailed around in different places. So this is now the Santa Maria. I don't know if they've done all three of them. I don't know if anybody knows if they've done all three of them or not. But and they have their own history that they're telling on this boat. How proud they are of the the village in Spain that that was responsible for these boats and the whole bit. But the interesting thing is, there is no mention of native people on the ship. There's no plaque. There's no illustration. It's like we didn't exist. So the whole idea is they're going to tell the story about the ship and its commander, Columbus. But we're not going to even bring up the native people. Look, it's not that they didn't bring up the atrocities. They didn't even bring us up, period. Yeah. It's like we didn't exist. It's like they just sailed into this vacant land. And that's why Columbus could take out his flag and post it and say, "I declare this land the property of Spain." Now, the reason he could do that is because the Catholic Church had already begun this doctrine of discovery and the enslavement of Africans 50 years prior with the King of Portugal going into Western Africa. Says, no, if you can go into a land that doesn't have any Christians on it, you can assert claim to that land. Yes. Because we're going to support you spreading Christendom to these pagan, and it wasn't that we were just pagans. They viewed anybody who wasn't a Christian to be the enemy of Christians, to be the enemy of Christ, and that's the language that comes out of the Vatican. So when Columbus sees these lands and knows they're not Christians, but he can now assert that these lands are now the property of Spain. So this begins the colonial era. And it also begins, it isn't just slavery that comes with Columbus. Because the whole notion that the church is advocating that the Christian nations of Europe can go into lands that are not occupied by the Christian nations of Europe already and declare those people subjugated and enslave those people, that he can take all of their possessions, including their land. That's where racism starts. I mean, look, there was plenty of persecution that took place in Europe already. It's ironic, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the second half of the show. It's ironic, the debate that is raging on now about immigration. Mm-hmm. It's also ironic to listen to somebody like the President of the United States refer to the four women in Congress who are kind of taking a stand against, frankly, the rest of the Democratic Party, but also Trump, and saying that that they must hate the United States, and if they hate it so much, they can go back to their crappy countries that they come from. Now, all three of these women were American citizens, and in fact, or all four of them. I mean, three of them were born in the United States, but that seems to get lost in all this stuff. But the irony is, the reason there's so many white people here is because they hated the countries that they lived in. They left Europe, a Europe that was in a shambles. That's why they left. They left because they had made a mess of Europe. Europe was disease infested. Europe was crime infested. Europe is where freedom, didn't exist. So to hear somebody say, "Well, if you hate this country so much, leave it," that's what you did. You hated your country so much that you left it. You didn't try to fix the countries that you left. You came here because this was new land that you could screw up. That's the bottom line. This was a new place that you could
claim it.
You not only claim it, but you could rape the land, the people, the environment, all of the creation here. That's what they did. And so then when you look at the immigration battle that rages on now, and these kids, these families that are trying to seek asylum in the United States, they're trying to, the very thing that Trump says to these four women, if you don't like it, leave. Well, that's what these people are doing. They don't like what their countries have become. And part of the reason they don't like what their countries have become is because of the appetite for drugs that the United States has. So they're trying to leave countries that have brutal dictators, oftentimes dictators that have been propped up and supported by the United States. So they know that if they come to this land, they're going to have a better opportunity, and that's what they're trying to do. But it's ironic to listen to the president of the United States tell people, if you don't like it, leave, which is exactly what Europeans were doing for hundreds of years. And early on, including under British rule, there was a much different view about white people coming from Europe than anybody else coming into the colonies, even before they were independent colonies. And of course, the United States, they had a white preference too. And and the people who were persecuted the most were the people of color, Chinese, the indigenous people here, people from South America, black people. They were either enslaved or nearly enslaved. And there was always a preference. Now, I'm not saying that Irishmen weren't persecuted, or Italians weren't persecuted, or Jews weren't persecuted. They were. But you know what they were able to do at some point? They were able to assert their whiteness enough to say, yuck, I'm white, so I should enjoy some of that white privilege. So eventually, even the persecuted immigrants that would come from Europe would have gained a certain privilege that came with their whiteness. But not black people, not brown people, not Asian people. They would continue to be persecuted. And that's the legacy that begins with the first white man to see brown people in this hemisphere.
The one thing was left out in the previous program is it also applied to women. And the women didn't matter what color they were. They still didn't have the right to vote. They still didn't have the right to own. And the children, they didn't belong to they belonged to the father. The father claimed them. You take a look at the persecution against women, and it was just as severe. People have to be aware of that, because I went through the University of Buffalo and I got a certification to teach U.S. history. And it's amazing the curriculum they teach, because they don't teach about the genocide, the rape, the slavery that Columbus brought about and that he carried on. They don't teach that. They just teach that he discovered these islands according to their curriculum. And that's one of the things that's wrong with a lot of these things about U.S. history, starting with the Columbus discovery of the Caribbean islands. And I think it's really important for people to start understanding their history, because their history is the basis of their current concerns.
Well, and again, even the characterization of discovering, that's such a difficult word for us to accept, because how do you discover a land that's already inhabited? I mean, that's what's so absurd. The idea that you could have a fully inhabited territory, and then have somebody else come in and say, "Oh, we discovered this, so now we can claim this," and that again comes back from the church. But you're absolutely right, Ed. It should not be missed that among the most persecuted people were the women, and the rape culture that came first with Columbus and with every boat that came after that was a rape culture. And the crazy part is, even as the church and others are suggesting that somehow we may not quite be human, they didn't stop them from having sex with these less than human beings. I mean, again, I talked about Thomas Jefferson because we did the 4th of July show and talked about the Declaration of Independence. I mean, how absurd is it that this guy writes that all men are created equal in his Declaration of Independence, while he's got slaves at home? Not just slaves that are working his fields, but slaves that he's sleeping with, slaves that he's fathering children with. And those children were slaves. Yeah, they were house slaves, but they were still slaves. This is the mentality that existed with these founding fathers. I mean, it's no wonder that you have a president today that is so obsessed with the racism that consumes him. We already went past the bottom there, so we'll take a break here, and we'll come back and we'll finish a little bit more on this topic. But I just think people have to understand The reason that we talk about Columbus not because I'm somehow carrying hate along with me, but I know too much not to talk about it. So we'll talk about it more when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
Sun comes up on another day. Same faces smiling my same way. I know she feels the same way too. Damn, it does you. Well, maybe I'm not the romantic kind. No candlelight dinners and no fine French wine. I love you, baby, but I forget to say. I know it's wrong, but I'm just that way. Feel the light, feel the light. Something going on. Feel the light, and it feel like we got trouble in the way. I'm here to tell you it wasn't always this way. You used to call me baby 10 times a day, and now the only call I ever get from you is from the bar. Half past 2. Feel the light, feel the light. Something going on. Feel the light, and it feels like we got trouble in the wing.
Thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I got Ed Schindler in studio. And we've been talking about Columbus, but, I guess we got to go a little farther than that. But first, let me remind people that I do have sponsors for the show. I've got Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, a few individuals, including my good friend Ed, who makes contributions to the work that we do here. Not only does he show up and contribute personally with his presence here, but he has also helped me with some of what we do here. Part of the thing is there's such a bias that just continues all the time, and I gotta tell you this. Two things. The only radio station I really listen to, or primarily listen to, is the NPR station here in Buffalo. But man, they get some stuff wrong. They got this Living in Buffalo series that they're trying to do, and they literally advertise. They say, whether you've come to Buffalo recently or your family came here 100 years ago, we want to know your story. I'm thinking, well, what about the people who were here before that? I mean, there's not, and this isn't just an oversight, because I actually reached out to them. I said, your campaign for this Living in Buffalo misses the fact that there were people who predate Buffalo. And I don't know how you reconcile that, but they don't address it. But and I got to tell you, some of the things that the NPR stations do, including the local one, they mischaracterize things, including. I think back when who's the Supreme Court justice, Sonia Sotomayor. So when Sonia Sotomayor was nominated for the Supreme Court, when they were describing her, they said she's the daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants. Okay, first off, the United States has claimed Puerto Rico as U.S. territory since the beginning of the 20th century. Puerto Rico is a part of the United States. Even if some of us think that's wrong, it's a part of the United States. If you come from Puerto Rico to the United States, you are not a freaking immigrant. You are an American that just went from one part of the American territory to another part of American territory. So to characterize Sonia Sotomayor as a as a daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants is wrong. And so that's 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Today, one of the congressmen here, Rivera in Western New York, was trying to give his statement about the racist comments that came from Trump relating to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley. His comment about, if you don't like it here, then go back to the terrible countries that you came from. Or, I'm paraphrasing, but whatever he said. He basically tell them, if you don't like it, leave here and go back to where you came from. Well, they come from here. I mean, it's just an absurd proposition. But WBFO, when they were talking about this Congressman Rivera making his comments in Buffalo, he said he spoke to a crowd that included immigrants from Somalia and from Puerto Rico. So they're still saying it. And I can't wrap my head around this thing. I can't wrap my head around a public radio station that is supposed to be a little bit on the left, and even if not left, you would think they would be correct in their history. And these characterizations, referring to somebody from Puerto Rico as an immigrant, it may not seem like a racist thing to say that, but the inaccuracy of referring to somebody from Puerto Rico as an immigrant is what kind of puts them, that label is what gives people the opportunity to criticize and to condemn. That's what happens with this whole idea of referring to a Puerto Rican as an immigrant. I mean, and the crazy part is when Trump is telling somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to go back to the crime-ridden, corrupt countries or places that you come from. She comes from the Bronx, and I gotta say, when I hear Trump say, these women come from countries that are corrupt and crime infested, yeah, you're right. It's called the United States. That is the corrupt country that they're from. That is the country that has a corrupt electoral system. It's got a corrupt government. It's got racist leaders. I think Congress tried to pass a resolution today condemning the president's comments about these four women. And it passed. The resolution passed to the House, but only 4 Republicans were prepared to condemn those comments. And this is the challenge we have, and this reminds me of me speaking to the city council of Niagara Falls when their mayor, a Democrat, stood up at a 9/11 commemoration and compared the first responders of New York City from 9/11 to the dashing young men of the 19th century cavalry. Yeah, the ones who murdered at Sand Creek and Wounded Knee and all of these places. Mm-hmm. The ones who weren't these young, dashing, intelligent young men. Most of these guys were illiterate, vengeful, bloodthirsty savages in their blue uniform. And he says he compared those ones at 9/11. He says they rushed into harm's way to save people. Those cavalrymen weren't rushing into harm's way to save people.
No.
So I spoke up at the city council in Niagara Falls, and I said, I'm asking you, the city council, and Paul Deister, the mayor of Niagara Falls, is sitting right there. I said, I'm asking you to condemn the comments of your mayor. I'm asking you to pass a resolution condemning the comments. Because not only did he make that comparison, then he went on to blame the Senecas for withholding payments to Niagara Falls and putting their first responders in danger. So he used 9/11, a 9/11 commemoration, to insult Senecas and to insult Native people at large by comparing the 19th century cavalry to the first responders who perished in at 9/11. And you know what? They didn't do it. They wouldn't do it. Not even the Republicans on that city council, who you'd think would want to take some sort of political shot at the Democratic mayor, they wouldn't do it either. So even though I made this comment, and I'll tell you, I had a standing ovation behind me. That place was packed. There was some battle over paying for trash removal or something going on there. So it just so happened at that city council meeting, the place was full. But I got up and I spoke my piece, and I got a standing ovation from the people behind me. And the people, the city council, they actually interrupted me, wouldn't let me quite finish my statement. They accepted it in print, and I handed it off to a few people in the press. But so when you see, even when you try to stand up and you try to raise an issue, about a racist comment made by a president or a mayor or a governor, you're hard pressed. You are very hard pressed to get anybody to respond and take any responsibility or hold anybody accountable for it.
I think one of the things that has to be understood is both the ignorance of the people regarding the history of their country, but also they have to pay attention to, like, Trump. Trump said that he represented the people who voted for him. He didn't represent the people who are American citizens. He said he represented the people who voted for him. And the people in Congress, they don't represent the people who voted for them either. They represent only the ones who are supporting them.
Yeah, financially.
Financially, yes. Those are the ones they consider their constituents, not the ones who are part of the American citizenship. They don't represent those ones. It doesn't matter if they're part of Kentucky and they don't, and you're talking about people in Montana or wherever else. They don't represent the American people. They represent the American donors.
Yeah.
They come right out and said that.
Well, it's interesting because Trump was confronted with his racist comments towards these women that they called a squad, Ocasio-Cortez, Omar, Tlaib, and Presley. And when he was asked about it, he said, well, many people agree with me. So as long as he's got a white following, and again, a racist following, he feels justified. And he was also asked, well, how do you feel about the fact that white supremacists eat up all this stuff that you say? He goes, oh, that doesn't concern me. So he doesn't mind that he's got, the KKK crowd, these white supremacists, and, all of these right-wing nut jobs backing his comments. He doesn't care. I mean, he knows that's part of his base. And then you get so much of the Republican Senate and House that they won't oppose him. I mean, one of the most vocal opponents that Trump had early on was Lindsey Graham. This guy is sucking up to Trump so badly that it's downright pathetic. I mean, it's just downright pathetic. But I think there's such an irony to listen to again to any white person condemn brown people and say that if they don't like it here, they should leave. Let's think about this for a second. Now, I'm not suggesting that running for Congress is a solution to the problem, but it's a solution. It's an attempt. Look, these four women and many others who run for these offices, they believe that they can fix it. The reason they ran for office, and frankly, the reason they were elected, is because people believe that there's problems and they need a voice like this. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I'm not saying I agree with her on completely and politically. I'm not saying I do. And of course, I don't vote in those elections anyway. But the fact is, it isn't that she hates the United States. She's recognizing the problems. And how is that not being patriotic? What could be more patriotic than putting yourself in a system that you already know is dysfunctional with this idealistic view that you can go there to fix it? I think that is patriotic. I mean, I'm not big on patriotism, but I mean, so to say that these people, they should leave the country. Look, here's my comment. If you're white, and you hate brown people? There's a whole continent that where you came from that you can go back to too. So before you tell a brown person to go back where they came from, well, and look, and I'm not condemning all white people. I'm saying if you are white and you hate people of color, if you're a racist and you don't like the browning of America, because that's what's at stake here. Look, this is a country that was founded on white supremacy. Right from Christopher Columbus's first voyage on the Santa Maria, the Nina the Pinta and the Santa Maria. It was founded on a belief that they had the church on their side, and they could go someplace and they could just declare property in the name of Jesus Christ and in the name of the whatever country sent them. So racism and slavery were at the foundation of these early voyages and would continue on through. So the fact that we live, what comes out of that is not just white supremacy, but what white supremacy establishes is what we call white privilege. And white privilege, and again, this is where, when I talk about, Italians or Irishmen or Jews, eventually that white privilege gets shared with them, even though they were persecuted early on as they came as immigrants. They ultimately would be showered with some of this white privilege as well. Here's the problem with white privilege: maintaining it. And what happens when you start worrying about white privilege is the third phase, white fragility. So the fear that white people have that they are going to lose their majority stake in controlling everything, that they may even lose some of their wealth. The fear, that is what white fragility is about. So when that starts to consume certain people, they have to be even more overt in their racism. A lot of what Trump is stoking is the fear that white people have, their white fragility. And they're so concerned they're going to lose something that they've got to keep asserting over and over again that anybody who doesn't agree with them must hate the country, must hate the land. Look, and I get accused all the time of being a hateful, angry person. And I'm not. Look, and I know I can say it, and I guess Trump could say he's not a racist, and I guess I can say I'm not angry. I'm not angry, but I'm informed. I understand what the true history is. And I look for it. I read the stuff. And look, I try to remain open to different perspectives. But when I hear not only a racist comment come out of somebody, and I'm not just talking about Trump. I mean, we experience this every day. But when you call it out, and the first thing somebody wants to do is deny, oh, that's not really racist. Or they'll say, yeah, but didn't you call somebody a white person? Calling somebody a white person is racist. No, it isn't. Well, I mean, we're not. I mean, to call out somebody who is a racist is not racist. I mean, I once posted a meme, and it's actually gotten some pretty good traffic. It said, racism is so American that when you protest racism, people think you're protesting America. I mean, how absurd is that? That if you fight injustice, then the assumption is that you hate the country that has the injustice. I mean, that is not even a reasonable deduction for somebody to make. Yet, that's what happens. So what we stand for in telling the truth in history is not just offering a counter narrative. It's about saying, look, it's not fair that you're going to educate my 10-year-old granddaughter and tell her stuff that's not true. It's not fair. It's not fair to her. It's not fair to the people that she's going to come to know throughout her life. It's not fair to the people of color that she's going to have to experience. If you're going to sit there and justify, say slavery was okay, oh, well, it was okay for the time. No, it wasn't okay for the time. Sex slaves was never okay. No. Building an economy in this country based on the labor stolen from human beings, on the land stolen from human beings, on the resources stolen from other human beings, on on destroying the land, the air, the water, on the elimination of species after species after species because of your own appetite for consumption. That's not fair.
And one thing that you got to realize is it's not fair to the coming generations. And that's one of the things that is misunderstood and not carried out within these United States. They don't look after the coming generations. To them, that's leaving money in the bank, not leaving air, water, land, and all the different.
Well, you're mortgaging the
ecology.
future of your own children and grandchildren, and of course, the reason we talk about 7 generations is that we, as Haudenosaunee, as Ongwe, we believe that we have a responsibility that goes beyond the generations that we will come into contact with.
Holding our, yeah.
Yeah, that we have a responsibility to those faces we will never see. Not just the beautiful faces of our children and our grandchildren, but the beautiful faces we'll never see. That's a beauty we will never see. And if we bankrupt their future with the elimination of species, with climate change, with perpetuating racism and injustice, creating such a divisive attitude. Look, the United States has had, has been rife with racism since its beginning. I mean, look, we were called miserable or merciless Indian savages in the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution of the United States counts a black man as only 3/5 of a human being. I mean, they don't even mention women in the Constitution. So when you consider the injustice that lies at the foundation of the United States and realize how much of it continues. Look, in my lifetime, I'm old enough that as a child, I experienced the civil rights movement. I witnessed some of that. But in the recent part of my life, this is the most divisive. I have never seen such overt racism expressed by so many people as I do today. And it's not because it wasn't always there. That what Trump has done is that it's empowered people. It's almost given permission for people not just to have this latent attitude and this latent racism, but to carry it even, but to shout it out to the world. Look, you can watch YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video of little old ladies condemning somebody simply for speaking Spanish or having an accent. I mean, you can find, people calling the police because a black person used a public pool. I mean, this is the world that we live in. And you know what? It is worse today than it was 10 years ago. Now, I'm not saying it's worse than it was in the 50s and the 60s. It certainly isn't. But it's heading back that way. It's heading back that way. And I don't blame Trump for this. What I blame is the cowardice of the people who will tolerate this. Look, it isn't the actions of my enemies that concern me. It's the inaction of my friends. It's the ones who won't do anything about what they experience in terms of seeing somebody persecuted and oppressed. If you're not willing to stand up for people who are oppressed, then you're part of the problem. So we begin this program talking about Christopher Columbus, because as far as this hemisphere goes, and look, I hear it all the time. Oh, all people had slaves. Well, that's not true. It's simply not true, and especially slavery for what we know of slavery. Look, I had somebody in New York call me and says, "Well, Egypt had Jewish slaves. Should I get reparations?" A Jewish person called me up and said that. I says, "Yeah, how's your life now? Do you still feel oppressed in the United States?" They said, "No." Then what are you complaining about? I mean, you look at the lives that black people live. The lowest end of the economic scale, highest unemployment of a major group, until you look at a smaller group, until you look at Native people. Then you realize the highest unemployment is in Native territories. The highest suicide rate is in native territories. The highest rate of missing and murdered women is in native territories. The highest rate of substance abuse is in native territory. The highest rate of death by cop today, not 1950s, not in the 70s, when AIM got started, but today, the highest rate of death by cop is native people. There's one age demographic, the 16 to 20-year-olds, where black people surpass, proportionally I'm talking about here, surpass native people in death by cop. That's the only demographic. Now, I am talking about proportionally here, because honestly, more white people are killed by cops than black people, because there's more white people. And because white people commit crimes at the same rate that anybody else commits crimes. And yet, if you go into a prison, you're going to see more black people in a prison. I mean, the deduction would be, oh, black people must commit crimes at a higher rate. No, that's not true. If you go into Canada, you're going to see 20% of the prison population are native.
Mm-hmm.
Native people represent only about 2 to 3% of the Canadian population, yet 20% of the prison population, even the women's prisons, 20% of the population are native women. Now, does that mean that we are genetically predisposed to commit crimes? Hell no. It's because today we still live with the effects of genocide, we still live with the effects of slavery, and we still live in a racist society. And I'm going to say it one more time. Racism is a white thing. Now, can a black man hate a white person? Yes, they can. Can a native person hate a white person? Yes, they can. But that's not racism. That might be racial bias. Racism is about power and a belief in superiority. Racism means that you view yourself genetically and racially superior to the people who are not like you. That's what racism is. Racism isn't even just about hate. You know what? There were a whole lot of white people who liked their slaves. There were a few of them who loved their slaves. There were a few of them who didn't love them but had sex with their slaves. It wasn't that they hated them. They owned them. They were superior to them. That is what racism is. So anytime I hear a white person say, yeah, I don't like it when black people are racist either. Well, that's you can say that, but black people aren't racist. Black people may have a justifiable bias towards white people because of a history of racism and slavery and Jim Crow and all that stuff. And you know what? So do native people. I'm not advocating racial bias. I'm not advocating hate in any way, shape, or form. But you have to understand the difference between racism and racial bias. I think it's just an important distinction. All right, we're just about out of time, so let's wrap it up. Ed, I want to thank you for joining me here. I'm still trying to figure out what we're going to do for our schedule on Saturday because I do have to go to Syracuse on Saturday. We may do a show on Friday or Sunday. I'll make an announcement and let you know which day, but we're probably not going to do a Saturday night show. I will be in New York on Thursday, though. I'm doing a 2-hour special. We're acknowledging Mandela Day on WBAI in New York, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Peltier, the longest serving political prisoner in the United States at this point. I'm going to talk about some of the absurd comments that even came from guys like Barack Obama relating to Mandela's funeral when he eulogized him. So I'll talk about a little bit about that. That's what we'll do our show on Thursday, and from 4 to 6 p.m. on WBAI. That's 99.5 on the FM dial, and then we'll be back here on the weekend. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Nyaweh.
Nyaweh.